Hello, everybody. So I'm not sure who is here. Hopefully, hi, Michelle. So good to see you here. So I know that there are a few people here. Thank you for being here. And I would love for you to say hello. And as new people are coming on, make sure that you're saying hello. I would love to know who is here and also where you're coming in from. Hi, Frederica. Good to see you. Hi, Barbara. Yay. And UK, so it's kind of late over there for some of you, huh? Well, thank you for staying up with me. So I'm going to give this just a little bit of time before I really kind of get into anything specific, but it's been a while. I actually didn't think I had done a live for over a year, but apparently I did one in February, which I guess I had forgotten about. So, hi, Dr. Sophia. Welcome. So good to see you here. Yay. So some people that I haven't seen in quite a while. Hi, Isabella. Yay. I'm so happy about that. Hi, Via. It really has been a while, hasn't it? For so many of you. Hi, Monica. All right. So really, this is just an opportunity to come together for some Q&A because it has been such a long time since I've done one. And I actually just did a small 10-day group. And while it was great, and there was definitely lots of really great connection in there, there was no live interaction. And I miss that. And I love it. Hello, Red Becky. Thank you, Barbara. It is certainly quite late for many of you, for sure. I wasn't sure with this time if I would have any of our people from Europe join us or not. So, yay. So Q&As, I love them. And I really, any questions that you have related to mental health, certainly childhood trauma, impact and healing, feel free to ask. If you've got the question, without a doubt, somebody else has that question too, maybe even somebody who's here with us live. So ask. And even if I've answered the question before, I do not mind answering it again because the way that I answer it might be a little bit different than I've answered it before. And in that different way, somebody might be able to take it in a little bit of a different way. So I am always happy answering questions over and over and over and over again. So, hi, Cheryl. All right, so if you've got questions, go ahead and start putting them in there. Let's get started with that. But in the meantime, let's maybe just take a moment to ground into this space, this container that we're sharing here together on YouTube. So if it feels comfortable, maybe just allowing yourself to feel the surface that you're sitting on or lying on, whatever you're doing, just feeling your body weight kind of sink into that surface a little bit. So just bring your attention to that spot, let your weight sink in, and really feel the connection to what is under you, and then feeling the support of that, knowing that you are held up with that. And just kind of let yourself sink in a little bit deeper. Let your muscles relax, let your shoulders melt down your back a little bit. Maybe release your jaw. If you've got any tension in your hips or in your thighs, see if you can release a little bit of that. Just take a couple of breaths, releasing a little bit more. And know that we are all here in this particular time together from kind of a lot of different places. And we're all here for a specific reason. And while that reason might have some similar or kind of the same underlying thing, there's a lot of different ways that we might feel about it or think about it or experience it. And even with all those differences, we're all here to be together in this space at this particular moment in time. And that's quite incredible. So just kind of let yourself feel into that energy. And we do have people in the US, in different parts of the US, in different parts of Europe. I don't know if we've got people from anywhere else at this particular time that I can see, or at least that said hello. So I believe that there are some other people here. So if you haven't yet said hello, please do. I would love to know who's here. I believe my VA is here as well, May. If you are here, please also feel free to say hello. Barbara says, I read something today that said that betrayal trauma is one of the most difficult things to come to terms with. Absolutely. And I have actually talked about this a little bit. I've never done a video, I don't think specifically on betrayal trauma, but I have talked a little bit about this, but I'm very happy to explore that a little bit more. Kind of an interesting thing that I've noticed over the last, I don't know, maybe a handful of years, maybe a little bit longer, people are referencing betrayal in a relation, like a partnership, romantic relationship. So like somebody cheating on somebody as betrayal trauma. And I'm not necessarily going to disagree with that, but I think that there is definitely a significant difference. And I'm not trying to minimize that, and that can be absolutely devastating for sure. But I think that there is an incredibly significant difference between that type of betrayal. And it definitely is. And probably, Barbara, the kind of betrayal trauma that you're talking about. And so I'm going to speak to that specific type of betrayal trauma. And it plays a factor. So part of the reason that I tend to talk about this, or the way that I tend to talk about this, is that the way that we are impacted, some of the things that create the multitude of layers that we have to heal, has to do with the nature of the relationship with the abuser, right? So the closer the relationship, the more layers there are. And if that relationship is with, if that relationship, the person that abused you, if you have a relationship with that person, I'll spit it out eventually. If that person is somebody that is close to you, that you should be able to trust, maybe even somebody that should be protecting you, that is the most significant experience of betrayal that we can have, by far. Because as children, we have no control, we have no power. And when the people that are kind of in charge of your well-being, and that could even be like a teacher when you're at school, so it doesn't have to be like a parent specifically, but there can be an aspect of betrayal trauma with a teacher or a coach, but the closer the relationship, the deeper the betrayal. And the reason that it is so incredibly impactful, again, we have no ability to have any sort of power or control in our lives as children. And when we have to rely on that person or those people, and we have to rely on them for shelter and food and a sense of some aspect of safety, when they are supposed to be the ones that protect us, the betrayal is much deeper because we have no choice and we have to rely on them, and we often love them or want to love them, and know on some level that they are supposed to love us and protect us. And when they don't, the way that that reinforces what we believe about who we are is so incredibly profound, because there is no way that you can come away from that without a deep core belief of, it could be maybe one of a few things, but ultimately it's all going to be something about a deep core belief related to who you believe you are, that there's something inherently wrong with you, that you are deeply unlovable, that you're not valuable or good enough, basically not worth protecting, not worth loving, maybe even deserving of punishment. So there's a lot of different pieces that can go into that. And again, as I talk about a lot, as children, we're not necessarily consciously thinking these things. I would say rarely, especially the younger you are, you're not consciously having any of these thoughts. It's just an automatic process that's happening. But we come away from that deeply believing these things. And again, often we're unaware that we believe these things. So that level of betrayal is incredibly significant. And I will also say that people who are religious and are abused by somebody within that religious realm, so it could be like an actual priest, or it could be somebody that just has a role within the church. But especially if it is somebody like a priest or pastor or something like that, that is also a very significant betrayal trauma. Obviously in a little bit of a different way, but the idea that we hold about who that person is in the world, right, in relation to whatever it is that we believe in, kind of, it's very different, but in a way kind of on a similar plane as like a parent or caregiver, your primary caregiver. So in terms of childhood trauma and betrayal trauma, that is really what it is. It's the nature of the relationship. How dependent are you on that relationship? Is that person somebody that's supposed to protect you and love you unconditionally, and that you should be able to feel? And this is, I think, one of the biggest pieces. Somebody that you should be able to feel so freely without any question whatsoever that you are always the safest with that person. That's why it is such a significant betrayal, because you are never again going to feel safe with that person. So absolutely, I agree that it is an aspect of what makes healing from childhood trauma the most complicated, because it does add so many layers to the healing that needs to happen. And it can also be that level of betrayal also plays a very significant role in the grief and loss that we go through in our lives, and also the healing aspect of healing the grief and loss associated with that. Because again, the higher level of betrayal, the more loss there's going to be, which is part of the reason that there are those additional layers that come from that. So I hope that makes sense. Please feel free to add something more to that if you'd like, or if anybody else has questions, feel free to do that as well. Via says, how can I help my son who is dealing with emotional abuse from his other parent? He's 10 and struggling to process it and keep his head up. First, I just want to say that I'm really sorry that he's experiencing that, and I'm sorry that you're having to go through that as well, because as a parent, it's definitely a really, really challenging thing to go through with your child, particularly if you feel like there's really not a whole lot you can do about changing the circumstance. And unfortunately, when it comes to like co-parenting, oftentimes there's really not a lot the other parent can do to try to change that. So Via, I would say keeping the dialogue open with your son, making it a safe space for him to be able to talk about things, and being mindful of acknowledging and validating what he's feeling, and not going to say really bad things about the other parent. I'm not suggesting that you would, but I know it's very easy and natural to do that. Trust me, I know personally from that. And I was not all that I wasn't as good as I would be now at that particular time in that regard. But while everything that you might say could be true, when people do that to somebody, so even for us, if somebody talks negatively about our abuser, and if that abuser is somebody close to us, we kind of naturally sometimes will go into a place of shutting down or even defending that other person. And children and their parents, that can definitely be the case. So being a place where he can share whatever might be there, I think as a parent is one of the most important things that you can do. If it's possible, having him see somebody professionally, I think is incredibly important. There might even be some sort of like group type of thing that he might be able to participate in, and if so, that would be great. But if he can see a therapist, and it doesn't have to be specifically about my other parent is doing this really bad thing. It could be that he's struggling with just family stuff or something like that. So it doesn't have to be the primary thing that you're saying he's going for. And maybe he doesn't even need to know exactly that that's why you're wanting him to go. But I definitely think it would be really important for him to be able to have that space to process what is happening. Reminding him kind of in somewhat subtle ways and more obvious ways, but the subtle ways really can make a difference, that that he's loved, he's accepted, that you're there, kind of countering some of the things that the other parent might be saying or doing. And while it may not be able to change anything for him now, as he's having to deal with this in real time, it will make a difference for him as he continues to get older. You are giving him experiences that when he has more control over his life, has more developmental capacity to really understand, those things will make a difference for him as he starts working and processing through it. So I hope that that helps. I wish there was something that I could say that would completely mitigate anything negative that he's getting from that space. But unfortunately, there isn't, if he has to continue to be around that parent. Now, I don't know if you've considered doing this. I mean, another option could be if it isn't known that this is happening, is can you maybe talk to a therapist and share that with a therapist? And then if the therapist is a mandated reporter, then maybe they would get involved, have somebody get involved. So maybe there's a resource in that way to get somebody else involved to try to get it to stop. That could certainly be the case. And I don't know how it is everywhere, but like in the US, if a child or even an adult told a therapist that a child was experiencing emotional abuse or a lot of difficulty in a home, if it created harm, that person would be required to bring that to somebody's attention so that somebody could get involved to try to change that. So I don't know if that's an option for you, but that could be one thing to consider as well. Hi, May. Thanks for chiming in here. So you might see CJ May. That is my incredible VA. Some of you have already met her, but May is somebody that you will be seeing around. And thanks to her, I've been getting videos out every week and sharing on social media and all of that. So hi, Monica. How does surviving childhood trauma relate to self-mutilation tendencies? So there can be several factors that play into, and I'm going to kind of maybe be a little bit more broad about self-harm. So self-mutilation might mean something very specific that you're referring to, but I know sometimes it can be a term that's used a little bit more generally in kind of a spectrum of self-harming types of behaviors. So if there is something really very specific that you want me to address, feel free to leave that in the comments. But in terms of self-harm, and self-mutilation, so maybe like cutting and those types of things, hitting yourself, those types of things like that. How does it relate to child or surviving childhood trauma? This is certainly one of those things that has a lot of complexity to it, but generally I would say that it is often a result of, on one hand, being very numb to your experiences emotionally and maybe even physically, disconnected from your body. And I don't mean that in like a dissociative way necessarily, but just like not being very attuned to our body. And physical self-harm is often a way to express that pain, discomfort, or emotion. And that can obviously express itself in a lot of different ways, but that is often ultimately what it is. And sometimes it can be a release. If you do feel pain when you do it, it can feel like you're releasing some of that built up pain. And again, the pain might be physical, but oftentimes it's mostly emotional. It can also be a representation of the pain. If you are disconnected and numb, the mark that you leave can be kind of a physical representation to identify that there is something very real that is there. One thing about self-harming behavior is that it is often certainly stigmatized, but even in kind of the mental health field, it can be a factor that I think can be a little hyper-focused on in terms of treatment. And while it's obviously an issue and important to address, I think that sometimes in the healing process or in the therapeutic process, sometimes there can be a little bit too much emphasis put on it, which can actually create even more difficulty with it. But I do want to be clear that it is important to acknowledge it and address it for sure. But what tends to happen, from my experience professionally, and I would say even personally, I suppose, although it wasn't intentional, the more healing we tend to do, the more in touch we are with our own emotions and our bodies, and accepting and acknowledging and honoring the emotional pain, physical pain, the less inclined we are to engage in those types of behaviors. Now, those types of behaviors often do become an automatic coping mechanism. So it's not something that happens without specific kind of conscious effort. But with healing, typically those types of behaviors tend to go away kind of naturally, as long as you're somewhat intentional about it. So there's definitely a connection, but it is often about expressing pain that we're not allowing ourselves to acknowledge in some way. You're welcome, Barbara. Isabella says, I haven't heard the term betrayal trauma before. If a parent does hurt a child, does it mean that parent doesn't love their child? This is a great question. Just because there's so much tied into, does it mean that the parent doesn't love a child? How do we know if a parent loves a child, right? There's just so much in that. But I'm just trying to be really mindful of how I say this, because it's one of those things that there's a lot of nuance to, and I know can be easily kind of internalized in a way that may not be specific to your situation. So it might not be completely accurate for your circumstance. And I'm saying your, meaning anybody watching this. So the short answer doesn't mean that the parent doesn't love their child. The short answer is no. Now, does it mean that the parent doesn't love the child in a healthy way, in a way that that child deserves for that parent to love them? Yes, without a doubt. But I think that there's a lot that goes into somebody loving somebody and how somebody behaves around that same person, how somebody treats that same person. There's just a lot that goes into that, and there's never an excuse, ever, under any circumstance, never an excuse to hurt somebody. Certainly not abuse somebody, certainly not sexually abuse somebody, certainly never an excuse for a parent to hurt a child under any circumstance. But in terms of love, boy, we could talk for hours upon hours upon hours about what it means to love somebody. The reality is, I think that there are a lot of parents who, or a lot of people even, that can love somebody to the degree that they are capable of loving somebody. And I think that that is a really important piece to try to take in. Because when we think about somebody loving somebody, we have an idea of what that should look like, right? And it could be a romanticized idea of what that looks like, some fantasy of what it should look like, or it could be based on what we've seen happen for other people. And it could be a really distorted view in an unhealthy way of what that looks like. But for all of us, we are only capable of loving somebody to the degree that we feel safe in loving somebody, that we believe that our love means something to somebody, that we believe that we are worthy of being loved. There's a lot of factors that go into our capacity to fully love in a really healthy way. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody who is unhealthy in that way is going to abuse somebody else. Doesn't mean that at all. It can look a lot of different ways. That can express itself in many, many ways. But I do believe that, is it possible, let me say it this way, is it possible that a parent may not love their child and therefore they abuse them? I wouldn't say they don't love their child and therefore they abuse them. Because there's people all around us that we don't love, including children, and we don't abuse them, right? So not loving somebody does not make you abuse them. And that might sound really confusing, but I think that's an important piece of that to take in, right? So whether a parent loves a child or not, that is not what determines whether they are going to abuse that child. So I'm not sure if that makes sense or not, but hopefully it kind of does. A parent being able to abuse their child has nothing to do with a child, and I would argue for the most part has absolutely nothing to do with how they actually feel about that child. Because what allows somebody to abuse another person, particularly a child, their child, has nothing to do with love or lack of love. It has something to do with something deep within them being inherently, I was going to say flawed, and I think that that is an accurate term. Now, I'm not going to say that it has to mean it permanently as a part of who they are that cannot change. Unfortunately, the reality is that most parents who abuse their children don't change because of whatever that is internally within them. They often are blaming other people, and so they're not going to do the work to try to heal whatever might be there potentially. So I know it's not an easy answer, may even be difficult to kind of really conceptualize, but I hope that that makes sense. And feel free to kind of ask for clarification or something, whoever might have some need for clarification, because I know it's a very complicated answer, but that dynamic is a very complicated dynamic, which is why it adds so many layers there. Um, oh, good. Via. Oh, where we go? Hold on a second here. This is he is in therapy. Good. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. Oh, good. Sophia, it sounds like you're really doing all that you really can. And I know as a parent, that's hard to accept and can feel like it makes me feel emotional just thinking about it. Oh, no. Is it possible for you to talk to his therapist? And does his therapist know that he's expressed this to you? This is definitely something his therapist needs to be aware of. And I am so sorry that you're going through this. My gosh. I mean, I don't know what is possible for you in this particular circumstance, but if it was somebody here, and I don't know where you are exactly. I think you've told me once before, but I don't remember. If you are here in the US, it may not make much of a difference, but if I were talking to somebody in the US, I would actually encourage that person to see if they could maybe get an attorney to try to intervene in this. And if you cannot afford an attorney, I don't know about other countries, but generally speaking, in the US, there are child advocacy centers that are free to access. And you could contact a child advocacy center and see if they might have some resources available to you, because that is definitely not okay and so incredibly scary. So I don't know if any of that can apply to you, but some considerations maybe. But definitely his therapist needs to know that that's where he's at. And maybe check with a therapist and see if that therapist has, where is that person in terms of being a mandated reporter? And I think this is enough to make a mandated report. So I hope you're able to get some support around that. Sophia says, for the first time in my life, I'm intentionally single or solo, but there's no template for a 35-year-old woman who does not want a partner. I want to be with myself, but I'm not sure how. For context, 2 years ago, I left an unhealthy marriage. I'm also recently out as a queer person. And I recently broke up with my girlfriend because I feel like I need to be alone, but I'm not sure why. I feel a bit disoriented and not sure what to do next. Great questions. And you're definitely not alone in being kind of in that place, and not just specifically about being 35 and coming out and all of that. But just kind of being at a place in your life where you've been in a relationship and kind of gone from that into, it sounds like, then another relationship. I think it actually can be a very healthy thing, particularly if you're on any sort of healing journey, that if a relationship ends, for whatever reason it ends, that you not only, maybe you don't necessarily desire it, but you give yourself the space. Or certainly if you do have this desire to just kind of be on your own, to kind of, whether it's just spend time on your own, or you just want to have time to not worry about other people, or you want time to figure things out, whatever it is, I think there can be a really, really healthy aspect to that. So let yourself kind of accept that that could actually be a really healthy thing for you at this particular time. I think too, you said you're 35. A couple years ago, you came out of an unhealthy relationship. I think too, if you've been in a relationship for a long period of time, especially if you were fairly young at the time that it started, finding yourself single, whether it's in your 30s or your 40s or something beyond, it can feel quite disorienting, because you're a very different person not necessarily a very different person, but there's a lot of differences in your life, right? In terms of where you're at 35 versus even 25, and sometimes even 30. So first, it can be actually a very healthy thing that you are wanting to be solo. And whether that's for a period of time or for a long time, either one can be completely healthy. In terms of kind of what to do, I would say that, first of all, reminding yourself that there's nothing wrong with it can be really important. there's this idea, I don't even know that I've said this before, but sometimes getting to know yourself, like actually doing things on your own. So if you are like maybe even going on a vacation on your own, going out to dinner on your own, going out and doing things on your own, just kind of getting to a place where you get to know yourself a little bit. And even if you're in a relationship, obviously you might not be doing all that stuff on your own, but I think taking time to get to know yourself a little bit is important. So doing those kinds of things, I think, can be really helpful. And if you are saying to yourself that you should be in a relationship or you should want to be in a relationship, that is always an indicator that what you're thinking and feeling is based on expectation and or fear versus a true desire. Anytime somebody says the word should to themselves, it is an indicator to take a step back and say, wait a minute, why is that true? Because should is typically a judgment about an expectation, or related to an expectation. So doing things on your own that you can enjoy and being mindful of enjoying it. And why do you enjoy doing it on your own? I think can be really helpful too, because we live in a society that tells us that being single, particularly as a woman, is not okay. And, you know, whether it's at 25 or 35, and certainly beyond that, that if we're single and not in a relationship with somebody, then, you know, what's wrong with us? And so kind of just being aware of any sort of thoughts that you're having about that. Again, judgment or expectations that you might be putting on yourself, or maybe even that you fear other people might put on you. That can be helpful as well. Let's see. It's really important that being single does not equate to never spending time with people. So you may be single, you may not be in partnership with somebody, but still spending time with people, with friends, with even like colleagues, like if they're going out, you know, for a gathering or something like that. So still staying in connection with people, but without it being romantic. Something that I will often encourage people to do, if they've been in a relationship, particularly if they've been in a relationship and then they're in the process of healing and that relationship ends for whatever reason, I will actually often encourage people to not get into another dating relationship for a period of time, in part so that they can focus their energy on themselves. Because when you are in a relationship, even if it's a healthy relationship, a lot of your emotional energy and a lot of your attention is on that relationship, which is completely reasonable. And that's certainly not a bad thing. But if you're in a healing process at all, whatever that healing process might be, or even just a self-developmental process, that takes a lot of energy and focus. But if you're in a new relationship or searching for a relationship, that energy and focus is outward. So in encouraging people to not get into a dating relationship, it gives them the capacity energetically to focus on themselves, to do some healing that might need to be done, to do things, to figure out what they do like and what they don't like. How do they like to spend their time? What movies do they want to watch without having to worry about input from somebody else? Like there's a lot of different factors that can go into it. And I think it's quite possible that this might be a really beautiful opportunity for you to have the time and the energy to focus on you, to honor all that is present for you that maybe you have kind of pushed to the side as you have been engaged in these relationships. And again, being in a relationship isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. Having new relationships, none of that is inherently wrong or bad or anything, but it does take energy and focus. And I will say too, this is certainly not my area of expertise, but I do know that when you have not lived your life in your full capacity, right? Because somebody doesn't just become queer, right? But because of the society that we live in, a lot of people aren't aware, or they're struggling with the reality of it, and so they pretend, or they're in denial about their sexuality. And so something that can happen quite often as people are connecting with the truth of their sexuality, or even themselves generally, but especially their sexuality, there's a lot of kind of processing that people go through, a lot of discovery about who they are, and what that means for them, that I think can be really important to give yourself the space to go through. And I think oftentimes, especially if like you haven't acknowledged that part of yourself for whatever reason, even if you were unaware that you weren't acknowledging it, or you don't have a lot of support, I do think that that can be a time that, while there's not necessarily some specific healing that might need to happen around that, I think it actually can be a helpful time to work with somebody who is a professional to just help process some of the different things that that means for you. Because there's a lot, even if you're feeling really comfortable and confident with it, and like you're not necessarily having any shame around it or anything like that, and maybe even have support, there's like, it's a major life transition to accept that part of yourself, to live your life in that way. And so that can create difficulty for people, even when it all like looks like it's all really great and good and healthy. So that might be something to consider as well. Hi, Minnie. What do you, sorry, let me just read this again. I'm sorry, Minnie, I'm not sure what you're asking there. I don't know if it cut off at some point or not. Red, I'm not sure if I should call you Red Becky or Red. Self-harm is generally something that you grow out of with time. You deal with it, and so you feel like you don't need it anymore. With healing, I would say is true, but I wouldn't say that that's true if you don't experience the healing that you need to have. Otherwise, typically it's going to continue. It may shift a little bit in terms of how it shows up, but generally, because the self-harm is there for a reason. And if you don't heal what the reason is, then there's going to still be some sort of self-harm there. Hi, Kai. Oh, that's okay, Sophia. And it is, I think it is still, it's part of healing, right? It's part of trusting ourselves. It's part of being able to connect with ourselves. So it's all good. Barbara, I did not, so I'm seeing your comment about not sure if I saw your comment, and I did not see your comment. Let me go up here. I saw, that's great, thank you. And then I saw a comment about the betrayal trauma. So let's just see here. So for whatever reason, Barbara, I'm not seeing another comment. Now I see a comment after, which I think is, I'm not sure if you can see my full comment on grief in a parental relationship, grieving what you had and grieving the loss of a safe parent. So I see those two comments, but I don't see actually, oh, the comment was too long. Is there a, I didn't know there was a limit. That's interesting. I actually didn't know that there was a limit. I'm not sure what that limit is. So grief in a parental relationship, and then you said grieving what you had, grieving the loss of a safe parent. So feel free to share a little bit more if you want. Michelle says, my father would tell me that he was doing what he did because he loved me. I believed him. It's taken a long time to work through. And that really is, oh my goodness, in terms of like those layers, like I couldn't even begin to tell you how many layers that creates. And even if they don't actually say that, there's just this inherent thing that we experience from that, or that we can experience from that, just based on the fact that it is a parent or a father or a mother, or whatever the case may be. There's just so much inherent that we take from that reality, but to be told specifically that that's why it's happening, my goodness, there's so much healing that will need to happen around that specifically. So much to undo with that. Hi, so I'm not sure. I think it's a combination of a couple of things. So Azumin, hi, so glad to have you join us. Oh, good, Via, I'm glad. I'm so glad that you've got that support there. What should I do when I feel overwhelmed? Well, so it might depend on what it is that's creating the sense of overwhelm, but I would say, so just kind of as a general statement, particularly if it has something to do or something related to this healing journey, a couple of things come to mind immediately. And one is to, not just when you're overwhelmed, but generally practicing some grounding experiences or techniques. So what I mean by that is regularly practicing some things that help you feel connected to your environment and the present moment. So, for example, if you start to feel overwhelmed, you might move your thoughts and your focus to, okay, what is happening right now? What is present for me right now? Feel your feet on the ground, grab something that you can hold in your hand. So basically, because when we feel overwhelmed, we're having all kinds of thoughts about the past or the future. And often there's a lot of fear or doubt or shame associated with that. So our thoughts are either past or future, even if it's a minute from now, like fear of what could happen a minute from now. So doing things to help us be present in this moment and move from those thoughts that are future or past focused to what is happening right now in this moment. So engaging your senses in what is present now can be helpful. Doing things that help you distract in a healthy way, also very helpful. And so that could be reading a book if it helps you truly distract from what's overwhelming. It could be getting outside and smelling what is around you. It could be talking to somebody. There's lots of different things that you can do. And doing them when you're feeling overwhelmed is really important. But even more so, I think it's really important to practice those things intentionally when you're not feeling overwhelmed. And I actually talk about this in the course Journey to Wholeness. I have a whole section on grounding, but it's in order for those grounding things to work in times when we're feeling really overwhelmed or panicked, our body has to have had an opportunity to experience it in a way that actually feels grounding. Because if you try to do those things solely when you're in that more activated state, it takes a lot more for you to come down and feel grounded. So if you practice during times that you're not feeling that activation, so just kind of a few times a day, just kind of be really intentional about feeling your feet on the floor or feeling how we started, feeling your body weight on the surface below you, being really present. When you're able to do that, when your system is not activated, then your body gets to be present and safe with that feeling. It begins to trust that that feeling is available to you. So then when you are feeling overwhelmed and you try to practice that, there's an easier connection that is made. So your body can more quickly get into that grounded place. Now, I know that is really kind of oversimplified, but ultimately that's really kind of what it is. So I hope that makes sense. Hi, Malu. I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce your name. Malay? Please correct me. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm really so glad to hear that. And thank you for being here. Isabella says, so is it better not to try to understand the why in an abusive parent? I would say yes, because there's never going to be a valid enough why. There just isn't. And ultimately, what is most important to understand is that under no circumstance was it ever about you. So not taking it personally, because part of the reason we want to understand is so that because we believe that if we understand, then it won't hurt as much. And that's just not, unfortunately, that's not the reality, because there isn't a way to understand. There is no why, really, that's going to help us in that way. So what becomes most important is being able to recognize that it never had anything to do with you, which means that then you don't take it personally. And that is ultimately what is most important about that. Any advice for those of us who have very little memory of what happened? The few memories I have literally feel surreal, like I am making it up. Not sure how to accept my truth when it feels unreal. Great question. So if you haven't seen it, my guess is maybe you have, but if you haven't seen it, I've actually done a video on, I don't remember the exact title, but like healing when you don't have clear memories or something along that line. So if you haven't seen that, check that out. It's an older video. My goodness, I don't know, probably at least 5 years ago, maybe around that time frame. But additionally, first of all, it's not all that uncommon at all to not have a lot of clear memory. And not having a lot of clear memory is always going to be something that people will go back to cause them to doubt themselves. So a way, in a sense, to stay in denial or to minimize the experience. So first of all, know that the fact that you don't have a lot of clear memory is not at all unusual. So it's also not uncommon, unfortunately, to therefore believe that somehow you must be making it up. And part of that is about self-protection, because it doesn't seem to make sense, but on a deep level, it's easier to believe that we're making it up than to accept that it's real, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense when you recognize that by believing that, it creates so much difficulty for us in our lives. But that is the reality. So ultimately, what I would say about this is, I think it can be really important in this type of, I think it's generally important to work with a therapist when you are on this healing journey. But for this type of situation in particular, I think it can be really, really important because there's a lot for you to be able to talk through, not specifically about memories, although certainly if that comes up, that can be a part of that. But there's a lot to talk through in terms of how you're questioning yourself, how you're doubting yourself, how you're not believing yourself, and everything that that means to you about who you believe you are. So not being able to trust ourselves, even if we have no memory, but there's just something that's kind of saying something's not right here. If we aren't able to trust in that, that creates a lot of problems for us in our lives in a few different pretty significant ways. So my biggest suggestion there would probably be, if you're not already, to work with somebody. And if you are working with somebody, being able to talk about it is really important as well. Okay, so here we go, Barbara. I find now I'm grieving the relationship, the loss of a relationship with a father and unmet needs. Absolutely. And it is such such an important part, such a necessary part of being able to really heal fully from childhood trauma, especially, again, the closer the nature of that relationship. And even for a non-abusing parent, if one of the parents was an abuser and the other parent was, there can often be a lot of grief and even betrayal with the non-offending parent as well. But I'm going to just focus on what you've said here. But it really is that loss of what you should have been able to have, the safety that you should have been able to have, the sense of feeling loved and protected that you should have been able to have. I would say, I'm just trying to think, is there an exception to this? So there may be, but I'm not able to think of it right now. I would say that loss, that type of loss, is the most significant loss that anybody could ever actually experience. I'm just letting things percolate here to see if there is an exception that's coming to mind, and I really don't think that there is. Now, losing a child, I'm fortunate that that's not my personal experience. I would imagine that would also be certainly right up there in terms of death. Without a doubt, I think that would be the most traumatic, difficult, horrific loss. But when it comes to impact, long-term impact on so many levels, that is, I think, the most significant loss that anybody can ever experience. I could be wrong. Nothing's coming to mind though. So the healing around that is multi-layered, and just like grief in any capacity, it's not linear and it takes time, and you move through it like back and forth and back and forth. I would actually say that might be, in terms of healing, so in addition to the betrayal aspect of it, but the loss, grieving the loss, is probably one of the most significant, it is one of the most significant pieces to healing from childhood trauma when your abuser was somebody like that in your life. So without a doubt, Barbara, a lot there. Michelle says, I've had a lot of good therapy over 20 years, good. I deal with each layer and return to therapy when I need to, and your video list has been an invaluable resource for me. I'm so glad to hear that, Michelle. And what you said about, it's been 20 years and dealing with layer, dealing with different layers and returning to therapy when needed, I think is so important for people to understand, because that is very natural for that to happen. It doesn't mean that the healing you've done wasn't valuable, didn't work, didn't mean anything. It's just, as life goes on, there are different things that might come up, and being able to feel okay about going back to therapy when needed is such an important part of, I think, being human, really. So thank you so much for sharing that. Malia. Okay. Well, that's easy enough. Malia. I will try to remember that. Thank you so much, May. So actually, it was Malia, I believe. So there's a link right after your comment that May just shared. Thank you so much, May, for doing that. That is the video that I was referencing in terms of being able to heal when you don't have clear memories. So for anybody, if you've not seen that video and you've doubted your memories or don't have a lot of clear memories, that video might be helpful for you. Isabella says, I find lately especially I am searching for excuses or reasons for my parents' behavior. Is that odd? It's not odd at all. It is actually a part of the rationalization that we do, because there can be two sides of this, but one side is rationalizing to kind of make excuses for it. And I would say that that's kind of the biggest thing. Now, there can be another side where you're trying to just make sense out of it. That doesn't necessarily have to be a coping mechanism. It can actually have a healthy aspect to it. But oftentimes it is about rationalizing it to try to make it somehow seem not as bad as it was. And that is coping. And that keeps you from being able to heal fully. Because I think it is important when we're healing to be able to put the responsibility where it belongs. And not just accepting like, okay, I know it wasn't my fault. I think it can be an important piece to actually be able to acknowledge whose responsibility it really is. Because if we don't do that, it's much easier for that responsibility to fall back on us. So it's not odd at all. And sometimes it can be, you said you're searching for excuses or reasons. Sometimes that can be kind of like when you're on this healing journey, almost like a last-ditch effort to try to grab a hold of something, to not accept the full depth of what it means that they made those choices. But not odd at all. Malaya says, I think the biggest barrier is the fear that I would ruin someone's life with a false accusation or an incomplete understanding of the truth. This is such a big fear that people have, and I don't know if I necessarily addressed this in that video. I have talked about this in different ways, in different places. That idea of kind of like ruining somebody's life. Now, even with clear memories, people can have a big fear of that. So I think there are, let's say, like two stages, so to speak. One is for you to be able to get to a place where you can accept and trust in what you believe to be true, whether you have any specific memories or not, but just kind of being able to accept that for you, which by itself can be quite a lengthy and challenging process. And then once you've kind of accepted that, because likely during that phase, you're probably not going to be confronting somebody. Now you might, and I'm not even going to suggest that that's necessarily a bad thing, but generally speaking, that's less likely going to be the case. But once you had the opportunity to get to a place where you can accept what is real for you, what is your real experience, whether you have memory about it or not, when you're there, then the other things that you're addressing here, those fears, then you have the ability to work through those. And I do just want to say, now accusing somebody without having a strong sense that it actually happened, I think that's a reasonable thing to consider. However, I also want to say this. Even when people have very clear memories, they worry about ruining somebody's life by confronting them or disclosing that it happened. And I have talked about this many times, and I believe I've actually done a video on it. I could not even begin to tell you what the title of that video is, though. And there's a lot for me to go through, so I'm guessing she may not be able to find it. But something that I think is so incredibly important for people to recognize, and I know it's hard to wrap your head around this, but if somebody abuses us and we disclose that, we share that, we no longer hold that secret, any fallout from that is solely the responsibility of the person who did what they did that you are now talking about. If they had not done that, if they had not made the choice to do that, you wouldn't have anything to be talking about in that regard. So if there is any sort of fallout from you disclosing or confronting, the only person responsible for that fallout is the person who did it. And I know there's all the yeah buts. I get it. I really get it because I was there too. Even well into my healing, I was there. But that is the reality. And I don't remember the exact quote, and I don't know who said it, but somebody said at some point, I think a long time ago, if somebody wanted you to talk nice about them, they would have treated you better. And now, obviously, that's a very generalized type of statement, but I think it applies, right? If you are sharing something about your experience and it puts somebody else in a negative light, but that is the reality of the experience, and what you're sharing is something that other person chose to do, it's because of their actions that they are seen in that way now. It's because of their actions that somebody may be feeling upset about something. You are not responsible for that. The person who did what they did that you are now talking about is solely the person responsible for that. But I know it's incredibly complicated, and it takes a lot of healing and processing to be able to get to a place where that feels like a reasonable idea. Barbara says, thank you for that acknowledgement. I struggled because I didn't love him and yet so wanted a loving father. Absolutely. There's so many circumstances, even beyond abuse, that people do not have what we desire, what we deserve in terms of our childhood experiences and certainly our relationships with our parents. And I think it's always so important, certainly around trauma, but even aside from that, to be able to acknowledge that, because when we don't have it, again, and I've said this, I think I've talked about this in other ways before, but trauma obviously is incredibly impactful. But in order to be wounded, it doesn't have to be trauma. There's a lot of ways that we can experience loss from our childhoods or from our family relationships. But certainly when there's trauma involved, it takes it to not even a whole different level, but like a whole different realm in a sense. So it's incredibly real and incredibly powerful. Monica shares, how do you deal with moving forward in a relationship with a parent who didn't believe you and may have even contributed to the abuse through negligence? Great question. This is one of those questions where I think there can be a lot of layers and nuance. So this is going to be a very kind of general thing, and somebody's specific experience, this may not completely apply. So I think there's probably a handful of things that need to be considered here, and I'm probably not going to remember them all by the time I would get to each one of them. But I think one of the most important things is being able to honor what you want that relationship to be. Like, a lot of times people believe that they should have a relationship, and that just simply isn't true. But there are a lot of reasons that we would believe that. And so recognizing and honoring, do I want a relationship? I think that's one of the first steps, because it is perfectly okay, and I would even argue much of the time healthy, to not have a relationship with somebody who abused you. In fact, I would say oftentimes, in order to heal, it actually might be necessary to not have a relationship. Now, having said that, there are some circumstances in which somebody would have a relationship, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, as long as it is a very deliberate and personal choice, and you're not doing it because you think you should, as long as you've been able to do some healing and are doing it for the reasons that are right for you. But recognizing, do I want a relationship? That's going to be the first thing. And if you decide that you do want a relationship, there's going to be a lot of factors that play into what that might look like for you in your specific circumstances. And definitely, this is an area where I would say it would be important to work with somebody who really understands childhood sexual abuse specifically, if that is your situation. If it's childhood trauma more generally, then somebody who understands childhood trauma. But if your experience is childhood sexual abuse, then somebody who understands childhood sexual abuse specifically. Because there's a lot to process in settling in what we truly want, because it's what we want. And it's coming from a healthy place. Because so often what we believe that we want comes from expectation and guilt and shame and fear. So if you do want the relationship, processing what it is that you want from the relationship, I think understanding why you want the relationship, what that relationship needs to look like for you in order for it to be healthy so that you can continue your healing and not be re-injured in that relationship. And then with all of that, you're really kind of naturally going to have a sense of how then to make that happen. But first, everybody, I want to understand this. You are not obligated in any way, shape, or form to have a relationship with anybody who made a choice to hurt you, no matter who that person is. No matter who that person is, whether it is a parent, another family member, a member of your church, or even an adult child. I have known many people who have been repeatedly hurt in a variety of ways, emotionally, physically, even sexually, by their adult children. You are not obligated to have a relationship with anybody who chooses to hurt you or has chosen to hurt you. So I think that is probably the most significant factor. And then there's a lot, if you do decide to have a relationship and you're working towards figuring out what that is for you, obviously having boundaries around that is a really important part as well. And so there's a lot of work, healing work that needs to be done in order to be able to understand what those boundaries need to be and how to set them and enforce them. There's a lot of complexity that goes into all of that. Setting boundaries, particularly as a childhood trauma survivor, can be one of the most challenging ongoing types of things that we have to deal with. So I know that doesn't give you a really kind of specific, simple answer, but I do hope that that helps you recognize what that first most important step is, and recognizing, is it really something that you want, that is best for you? My pleasure. Again, sorry, not sure how to pronounce. Zuman, not sure. And feel free to correct me. But you're very welcome. Michelle says, although I have allowed myself to feel grief around my father, I'm aware that he is now in his 80s and the inevitable is going to happen probably soon, and I'm afraid of how it will affect me. I'm glad that you're aware of this, because if you're aware of it, then when it happens, you're much more inclined to work through it in a healthier, more conscious way. For a lot of people, they don't expect it, and it can send them to a place where they start trying to navigate it without being consciously aware of what's going on. It can actually create a lot of difficulty. I will also say that when an abuser passes away, no matter what age they are, it is a natural point in which a lot of survivors find that they're struggling again. And that is true even if you've done a ton of really great healing and you have even felt like you've been on the other side of healing for a long time. That can be a circumstance in which you find yourself having some difficulty again. And you may not have any awareness, you may not be able to connect the dots there. And that difficulty can show up in a lot of different ways, sometimes relatively mild, sometimes quite significant, particularly depending on how much healing you've done. But it is a very natural time that people can start struggling again. And therefore, it is a time that I often recommend to people that they do go back to therapy. Even if they feel like they're managing it pretty well, there's just a lot that can be present in that. So again, glad that you're aware that it may affect you. And in all reality, it likely will. But the more conscious you are through the process, the less impact it likely will have. And just be mindful that it might be a good time, even if you feel like you're doing okay, even just to go back for a couple of sessions. Maybe that's all that's needed. I realized that I kind of missed part of this other question here. How do you deal with moving forward? Actually, this was your entire question. Sorry. How do you deal with moving forward in a relationship with a parent who didn't believe you and may have even contributed to abuse or negligence? So sorry, Monica, I completely misread part of that question. And so May is leaving for the day. She is in a completely different time zone. So thanks, May, for being here. So that might apply for some other people. So I addressed having a relationship with the abuser. How do you go about the parent who didn't believe you and through their negligence may have even contributed? I would actually say, for the most part, the same things apply as to what I said just a moment ago about a relationship with the abuser. Now, I think that depending on other aspects of the relationship, if the relationship generally is relatively healthy, now you said you weren't believed. So to me, actually, unless that person's done a lot of healing themselves, my guess is the relationship probably is not very healthy. So in that regard, this is a circumstance in which I would recommend working with a professional to help you sort out what it is that you want, because I think it's going to be very important to have a conversation with that person. If in fact you do want to have a relationship with that person, there will be really important and significant boundaries that you will need to set. And so working with a therapist who understands childhood trauma, again, if it's specific to sexual abuse, I would very strongly recommend that, because there's a lot that goes into it. And definitely there will certainly be boundaries that need to be set if you want to have any sort of relationship with that person. And setting boundaries in that type of circumstance is not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of pushback. Very likely you're going to struggle with setting those boundaries. But certainly in terms of recognizing what do you want that relationship to look like, that's going to be an important part of that as well. My guess is there's probably going to be a need for a conversation, that it's going to have to be addressed, the so-called elephant in the room. You might even consider with your therapist maybe having a joint session with that parent. I think that can actually be a really helpful piece if that person is willing to do it, if your therapist is willing to do it, maybe even more than one session, if it seems like that could be beneficial. Now, I will say, and I'm just thinking about what you said about the parent not believing you, again, which suggests that there's some unhealthy pieces here. From my experience, unless that person has done healing or is willing to do some healing, is willing to have those difficult conversations, the likelihood of you being able to have any sort of real relationship that's healthy is likely going to be fairly slim. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have any relationship. Just going to be really important to have some very clear boundaries around what that needs to look like. And then for you to feel safe enough within yourself, trusting enough within yourself to be able to enforce those boundaries. But really, please work with somebody as you try to sort through all of that, including setting those boundaries, having that conversation, because that by itself can, in a sense, be re-traumatizing. So I know that that's probably a lot more than you anticipated, but I do think that all of that is really important to consider as you're thinking about that. And in all reality, a lot of people do choose not to have a relationship with that particular parent. Again, especially if, most specifically, if they are still in denial about it. Sometimes, as much as it can hurt, as hard as it may be, not having a relationship is the best, the right, and even the most healthy thing to do. So probably not what you wanted to hear, but hopefully helpful. Okay, Malaya and Michelle. I'll try my best to learn on grounding. There's a lot of information out there on grounding, and probably even some stuff on YouTube. I don't know that I've done a YouTube video specifically on grounding. I'm not sure. Okay, good, Monica. Frederica says, just wanted to say I wouldn't be where I am now if I hadn't had you at the beginning of my long journey. Your advice is always thoughtful and practical. Thank you so much, Frederica. It is such an honor to hear that, and I really appreciate you saying that. And it really is an honor to know that that is true for you, that I have played any role in your healing. So thank you for that. It's so amazing to me how a space like this, certainly on the live Q&As, but even the videos themselves, like just how impactful it can be when we hear somebody talk about something that we don't typically get an opportunity to talk about. And that is so much the reason why I started this, and this channel and sharing things publicly, because the more that we can talk about things, the less shame and stigma there is. And it's so interesting because I actually just recorded a video earlier where I ended up talking a little bit about that. But thank you, Frederica, for sharing that. I appreciate that. All right. Malaya says, any tips for psychosomatic symptoms, reenactments, and related conditions like UTI symptoms, and so forth? So I think it is important. Now, certainly there are a lot of correlations between being a survivor of childhood trauma and a lot of different types of medical related issues. And certainly the things that you mentioned here, digestive issues, bladder types of issues, UTI issues, fibromyalgia. Those are some of the most common ones, and certainly any sort of reproductive types of issues as well, all heavily correlated to childhood, particularly sexual trauma. So tips. I think, first of all, having a full, complete physical, making sure that there is nothing that needs to be addressed medically. And so that might include, like if there's a lot of recurring UTIs, it might include seeing a urologist, and potentially having a cystoscopy, maybe having your kidneys checked. Like there's some things that might be really important in that regard. In terms of any sort of reproductive or sexual types of issues, getting a thorough exam, sharing your concerns with a gynecologist. to make sure that there isn't any specific things going on there. And that could be something like endometriosis or fibroids or other sorts of conditions. It could be even potentially that there could be some scarring. And that's been the case for quite a few people I've known, that can create other sorts of issues as well, including actually UTIs. So whatever the ongoing type of symptoms you might be having or experiences you might be having, making sure, whether it's by like talking to your family physician or maybe seeing a specialist, to rule out any sort of medical condition that needs to be addressed. That's, I think, the most important thing. Beyond that, I will say that there are some different things that you can do related to healing. So kind of like with the self-harm, as you go through the healing process, there are some things that may naturally begin to lessen or even potentially disappear altogether as you heal. So, for example, I will give myself as an example to this. Many years ago, long before I started healing, I had had digestive issues basically my entire life. And I don't remember at what point I had ended up being diagnosed with IBS. And I actually got tested. I had been having problems for a long time, but I never told anybody about it. But I was actually at my gynecology appointment talking about other issues. And I don't know if she asked a question. I don't know if I happened to mention it for some reason. I think she actually asked a question. It might have actually been my mom's history. So my mom had been diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And I think maybe that's how it came up. And then she asked me some questions and I said, well, yeah. And she said, okay, I need you to go see a gastro because that could be contributing to this. And so I went and saw a gastro and ended up being diagnosed with IBS after a colonoscopy. And I did fit, like the typical types of symptoms and everything. And that was before I started healing. And I didn't address it. I didn't take any sort of medication or anything like that. It wasn't really severe. But through my healing experience, I ended up no longer having those symptoms any longer. And for the most part, really not having any specific sorts of gastro problems, particularly not those particular symptoms. So healing, just going through the healing process, releasing some of that stress that I had been carrying, the shame that I had been carrying, the doubt, and all of the stuff that's associated with what it means to be a survivor. As that began to go away from healing, so did the symptoms. And that is true. I'm not going to say that that happens all the time, but that is true for a lot of different types of symptoms that people tend to struggle with. So healing can help with a lot of that. There are some like stress reduction types of things that can help with some of that. Different types of meditation can be helpful. John Kabat-Zinn has done a lot with like physical pain and meditation and physical illnesses and meditation. So he might be a great resource as well, but meditation can be really helpful. Things that ultimately help you release some of the stress, because stress intensifies everything and creates more imbalance in your system. So everything that you can do to help with stress can help any of that. I would say those are probably the biggest things. I'm just trying to think if there's something else there. But first and foremost, working with a medical professional to see if there is something physically going on that is creating that. Because even if it starts, so like I have no doubt that my IBS was a direct result of all the stress that I carried throughout my life, right? As all childhood trauma survivors carry. And how it manifests in your body might be different than how it manifested in mine. But without a doubt, there's a correlation there. Might even argue cause and effect. But even with that, right? Like if I needed it, if symptoms were bad enough, taking medication might have been an important part of that. So while there still are some things that you can do on a psychological level or emotional level that can help, there may still be something that might be important on a medical level as well. Oh, thank you, Sophia. That means so much to me. Really, it does. It means so much. Thank you. Oh my goodness, you guys are going to make me emotional here. Thank you. So Sophia said that I changed her life for the better and is grateful. And thank you truly for saying that. Michelle says, helped us break through shame and find our voices. And I can tell you how much that means to me, because that is, whether it's one-on-one work or YouTube videos or whatever it is, that is huge, because that's what healing is. That's ultimately what healing is. And so truly, thank you. Barbara says, I'm delighted that I joined you, Peggy, and everyone here. Conversation has lifted my mood and spirit. Your enthusiasm is something I so appreciate. Thank you. And your presence and everybody's presence here is something that I so appreciate. Truly, it makes me like, these are hard things to talk about, right? But really think about it. We're having conversations that most people don't have in their everyday lives, or even life generally, not just every day. But we're able to come together in this place and talk about this stuff. And there is so much healing that happens in that. So much. And so much so, I actually have a little bit of an announcement that I will make in a moment. But truly, thank you for not only what you've shared here, but being here and being a part of it. Because without without people asking questions, there wouldn't be a conversation. Without people commenting and giving me information or ideas and inspiration to continue to talk about things on YouTube, we wouldn't be here together. So that gratitude and appreciation is so much given right back to every single one of you, truly. And it's so incredibly inspiring. So, and again, having said that, it really, well, I'll talk about that in just a second, but I want more of it. I want more of that. So, Maya. Thank you so much. That means a lot. It really does. So she's shared, I don't know if you guys are able to see all of this or not, been really helpful in helping her heal and having some really great therapists, but that I kind of tend to talk about things in a little bit of a different way, and actionable. And that's actually kind of surprising for me to hear, honestly, because I sometimes feel like, because I know there's a lot of people out there that give you specific like tools and things that you need to do and stuff like that. And I do that sometimes, but I feel like much of my content is not so much about that. And sometimes I feel like maybe I should do that a little bit more. So that's actually really great to hear. I appreciate that. And, Barbara, what you said here about the conversation has lifted your mood and spirit. And I think that is, and I'm glad to hear that for you specifically, but I also think that that is such an important thing to be able to recognize, that just being in this space together, the difference that it can make. And not just for this moment, but when we really let ourselves take it in, the difference it can make for our continued journey and how we feel about showing up and connection and vulnerability and all of that. I'm so glad. You guys are just so... Thank you so much for your very kind and beautiful words. I really, I appreciate you taking the time to share that. So, I think, does anybody else have any questions first? I want to make sure that I answer any questions. I think that I have responded to everything. So Isabella said, me too. Thank you so much. Found your videos at my lowest point in life. Thanks to you, I'm still here. It still amazes me that people are searching for stuff like this on YouTube. And I know that I just have kind of this little tiny corner of YouTube, but I have people that have been here. I have a lot of people that have been here for many years and still here, and such an important part of this community. And it really is a community. And even for people that aren't participating, but they see other people comment and they get to see the same people sometimes over and over again, and that helps them feel more comfortable, and eventually they end up sharing. And there's so much healing that happens in that. So there will be more information that will come out, so you will be seeing this. But I'm actually going to be starting something new. If there's interest, if it goes well, I'm planning on making this a monthly thing, not this specifically, but this new thing, a monthly experience, and it will be private. So here we are on YouTube and everybody can see this. But I did a group just recently, and just a very small 10-day group, and it was great. There was lots of great connection in it, but there was no live component. There was no live interaction, and I really enjoy the live interaction. And so I've decided to do something that I've been thinking about doing for a long time, and that is to see about having a monthly live gathering. And it will be on Zoom, so it will be private. It will be for women who have experienced childhood trauma. It's not going to be solely focused on childhood trauma, but we'll know that it's a safe place for all of us to be. So we'll be talking about all kinds of things, but we'll be together on Zoom once a month, and it will be much like today was. So you will not be on camera, so that might ease some people's concerns. So it will be a lot like today. There will be a lot of Q&A. There will be some, maybe some group healing things that I will lead you through, kind of a small piece of it. And depending on how it goes, if we're going to continue month to month, then I'm anticipating incorporating a little bit more into it. But the first one will actually be Tuesday, November 14th. Likely at the same time that this started today. Now, going forward, if people do want to continue to go forward and you're really interested, but that, whatever time doesn't work for you, I will actually be asking people to give me their feedback in terms of times. And I'm thinking it will likely be on a Thursday. Maybe even alternating days depending, but I'll be looking for some feedback on times. So if that's something you're interested in, I have a link here, and I will put this once this is over with. I will put it in a comment and pin it to the top so you can come back. But right now I have a wait list that you can sign up to if you're interested in participating. So you're not committing to anything, but you can sign up so that you are sure to be notified when registration opens for that. And then going forward, I will be asking for feedback. And so you'll be able to offer feedback in terms of time if that's something that you're interested in. So it will be really kind of casual. It will be an opportunity to connect and spend time together and have a place. Like, I'm just imagining kind of like a gathering where we're coming together. Maybe you grab a cup of tea or whatever your favorite beverage is, and we just kind of come together and hang out. And I'm really excited about it to see how it goes. So I just shared the link. I will pin the link in the comments when we're done here. So if you are interested, click on that link, sign up for it. There will be a cost, but a low cost, probably around $11. And then, like I said, it may be a thing that you have the ability to sign up for a period of time, and we'll meet every single month. And so I am looking forward to that. Definitely looking forward to that. So I would love to be able to connect with all of you. And if for whatever reason the time does not work for you, because I do know that I have people all over, if the time does not work for you, again, I might be able to adjust the time a little bit. And there will be a replay as well available for a short period of time. So you will be able to watch on replay if you're not able to make it live, or if you're not able to make it for the whole thing, you'll be able to watch the rest of it. I'm anticipating probably about an hour and a half or so, maybe a little longer, maybe a little less time, I guess, maybe depending on how many questions there might be. But an interesting thing about the Q&As when I've done them in group is that even when we meet every single week for group, there's always plenty of questions, which I love. I absolutely love Q&As. So I really feel inspired and energized when I'm done. So I would love to connect with all of you. And if you know somebody that might be interested in it too, feel free to share with them. I think I am going to limit it to women, just because I know that while a lot of people might be comfortable having men there, I think just generally it creates more of a sense of safety. And if you're a man watching this and it's something that you would be interested in doing, if you know some men that would be interested, or if you are a man and are interested, let me know, because if there are enough men interested, I would absolutely be open to doing this for men as well. So I enjoy working with men. It's just, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of men that, for many, any number of reasons, aren't necessarily that interested in doing something like that. So if you are a man interested, let me know. Okay, so let me just kind of go back here. And if you've got any questions specifically, you can let me know. Or even afterward, you can leave them in the comments as well. Barbara says, I love your summer group on Zoom. It was powerful and so healing. Thank you. I love these live interactions. Oh, good. Michelle says, I'll have to learn how to Zoom first. Not very techy. So there's a little bit to learn, but if you can navigate getting on a live YouTube, my guess is you can probably navigate Zoom. It is a little bit to learn, but it's not too complicated, especially if you're not going to be on camera. So the chat works pretty similarly. So you guys will be able to connect in the chat, just like you're leaving comments here. You'll be able to connect in the chat as well. So if you've got questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will answer. And if you ever do have a question that you'd like me to answer on a YouTube video, please feel free to send it to Q&A@courageousjourneys.com. But if you join me in this group, you'll be able to ask there, and we'll be able to actually have a little bit more of a conversation, because sometimes, because of the nuance, it is helpful to get more clarification on a question, or if somebody asks a question and I respond to it, it might bring up another question for somebody. And so being able to ask in this capacity is I think just really incredible. So feel free to ask whatever questions you have about the upcoming group or anything else. And I'll just double check to see if there are any other questions. It doesn't look like. So if there is around the group, around the Courageous Connections group, if when the registration opens, if you've got any questions or issues or anything like that, feel free to reach out and let me know. But it will be a fairly simple sign up type of thing. And then you will get the link for the Zoom call. And then you'll just be able to join live when we go live. So I really hope to be able to connect with you there again as well. And thank you for being here. Thank you truly so much for being a part of this community, this conversation, and helping to really ultimately completely eradicate the shame and stigma of what it means to not only be a survivor of childhood trauma, but to struggle with the experience, to struggle with healing, all of it, because we can. I truly believe that we can. You know, it used to be a stigma to have breast cancer, for example. And while some people might still feel some shame around that, I think societally, there is no shame. There is no stigma about being a breast cancer patient or survivor, or any other type of cancer, for the most part. And that happens because people are willing to talk about it. And we have the power to do the same thing. In fact, we are doing the same thing already. We can do that. All right. So thank you to everybody for being here. Malaya says, I've never had the courage to ask a question in a session like this before. So I don't know if that means that you've joined on things like this before and haven't asked or not, and it doesn't necessarily ultimately matter. But thank you for sharing that, because I think that that is something that a lot of people can relate to. It's vulnerable. It is incredibly vulnerable to do that. And there's so much healing that happens in being able to do that. So thank you for allowing yourself to push through that fear and ask the questions and participate. Your presence here has been amazing today, and that is true for each and every one of you. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it, and can't wait to connect again soon. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and I do hope we get to connect very soon, November 14th. If not sooner, in some capacity. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, day, and certainly the rest of your week. See you soon.